Hello and welcome to episode 87 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Amanda Kenderes, who has over 30 years of experience researching communication across 40 countries and over a decade in academia. She is also the author of Talk Types, How What We Say Reveals Who We Are. In this episode, Amanda shares how her global upbringing helped her uncover the 6 talk types that define how we connect, influence, and build relationships. Whether you're a leader, salesperson, teacher, or just looking to improve your everyday conversations, this episode is packed with insights that can transform the way you engage with others. Let's get started. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you, Scott, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
My pleasure as well. Really looking forward to our conversation. I think with your background and the work you're doing, it should be a really interesting conversation around communication skills. But before we get too far into it, if you could tell the listeners just a little bit about you, your career journey, and the exciting work that you're doing today.
Yeah, so there's so much to say. I'll try to keep it brief. Sort of how I got here. I was raised internationally. My dad worked for the US Embassy, so we moved to a new continent every 3 years. And that ultimately was probably the number one factor that shaped uh, my journey, my communication journey, and ultimately my career. Um, because I had questions, kind of growing up. I got to see a whole host of cultures and communicators and in languages across every possible variable you could think of. And I noticed that the typical theory or idea that alignment um, makes connection wasn't always the case, at least with the alignment that we're expecting. Sometimes I would find myself connecting more with someone who didn't speak my native language, who didn't share my maybe educational background or gender, class, religion, political persuasion, what have you, all of these demographics. But what I found is that if we shared a talk type, which I eventually came to kind of to see these talk types, these 6 talk types that I have that I discuss in my book. If we shared a talk type, that was the most important factor uh, in connecting. But it took a while to get to. I discovered talk types, kind of first put it into words at 19, and then I've spent the next 25 years refining the model and finally publishing last year. So it's been a lot, but it's been amazing. It kind of feels like a fish trying to identify water and explain it.
Yeah, I've always heard that one of the hardest things to do is explain to somebody that's never been in water what it feels like to be submerged in water, right?
Absolutely.
And what a fascinating journey just hearing that. And I can only imagine, oh my gosh, moving to a different continent every 3 years. But what a tremendous opportunity that is to have so much exposure to, as you mentioned, different cultures, different languages, and then ultimately all these different ways that people communicate, the different styles, just the nuances from region to region, country to country, continent to continent. And I'm sure had a major influence on the work that you're doing today. And I'm sure across all of those journeys, you came across some really great communicators, probably some not so much. As you mentioned, some people you connected with very quickly and had alignment with because of the talk types. But when you hear the phrase that somebody is a great communicator, something that gets thrown around quite a lot. Oh, so and so is a great communicator. Oh, you got to hear this person speak or talk to this person. When you hear that somebody is a great communicator, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, the way that I would answer that question 20 years ago or 30 years ago is so different than the way that I would answer it now. Now that I see my talk type model clearly, and I see that really people across the planet only speak for 3 ultimate reasons. three fundamental reasons. And when we rank them by preference, we get 6 talk types. And so now, knowing this, I would answer that a great communicator is somebody, if they're familiar with the talk type model, who is able to recognize talk types and adjust their own talk type to other people's preferences to facilitate smooth communication, to be able to be adaptable in that way is it's a huge skill. It's one thing to recognize our own talk type and then
Mhm.
it's validating and saying, oh yeah, hey, I know who I am now as a communicator and um but often, we've gotten stuck in relationships thinking that, well, we're self-referentiating. We say, well, uh, look at this. This is who I am. I'm right. I'm a good communicator, and we try to get people, especially those closer to us, to try to bend their communication to the way that we would do it. And sometimes, we can ask people to do that. But ultimately, and especially with people we meet for the first time, we don't have time for that. And
Mhm.
it's not appropriate. So to really be able to communicate well is to meet others where they are, and it's an act of generosity as well. So I that would be my answer today.
So three things that I heard there is one, the idea of self-awareness. You need to be aware of your talk type. Other component is awareness of others, trying to pick up on who I'm speaking with, what their talk type likely is. And then third, I think importantly, is the flexibility to be able to adapt the communication. As you mentioned, I think a lot of people fall into that trap of, well, I'm this, I'm that, this is how I like to communicate, this is how I'm comfortable communicating. And so that's what they go forward and they somewhat ignore the audience a little bit, much to their own peril. Because if you have that disconnect with your audience, your message likely is going to fall flat. And as I think about this, as you were talking, with the work that you've done around the talk tracks, do you see, I don't know if patterns is the right word or grouping? So, for example, do certain talk types, talk tracks go towards certain careers? Like, do you tend to see patterns with accountants versus salespeople versus IT people or things like that, or is it really just all over?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I would say generally, yes. And people, so the talk type model and book just came out last year. So it's just growing now. A lot of people don't know about it. It's new. And so we see people, if people did know about it, they might make different choices and make more intentional choices based on, where they fit in communicationally. But just in terms of, we could take a survey of what we see, the lay of the land. And yes, absolutely. People, let's say accountants are going to be more maybe AB, AC. The talk types, we've got the three reasons for talking, A, B, and C, just for shorthand. And then, the 6 talk types, A, B, A, C, B, A, B, C, C, A, and C, B. So those who are more factually inclined, that's kind of where they like to talk about facts, listen to facts, add to their understanding and their knowledge. Yeah, they're going to be naturally more drawn to careers in accounting, sciences, anything that involves factual scientific information,
Mhm.
objective information. Yes. And then we may find folks that are more um, interested in the subjective experience of people. I don't want to say social because we can be social in all of the talk types, but more interested in making small talk and in hearing people's subjective experiences. Yeah, we might be more drawn to customer service um, or sales. Um, Anything where we have relating is going to be first and foremost for these folks, and then finally those that are interested in the kind of deep subjective understanding of people, um you know talk about your childhood and your journey and your growth and your challenges. Those are the C's. And they may find career fulfillment in psychological fields, coaching, um, and mentorship. Absolutely. Absolutely. We tend to be drawn to areas that complement our talk type. But absolutely, if we know more about our talk types, we can make even more intentional choices career-wise.
Yeah, so as a communicator, if I'm going out and delivering a speech to maybe an accounting association, or if I know I'm going in and pitching something to a group of sales leaders, I might want to think about what's their likely talk type and what's going to be important to them, and then start to maybe tailor my message more to the bottom line and results, say for a group of salespeople, or the details, the facts, the logic of it for the accounting association versus focusing on the feelings and the understanding, the bigger picture of it. So yeah, I think it's an important skill not only to, as we talked about already, understand where your audience may be, and you have to be able to fine tune along the way, but the key is adapt your message, right? You can't deliver the same message to the same person over and over again and expect to get the same results, because like I said, everyone's going to be a little bit different with that.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, instead of expecting people to meet us where we are, the act of generosity and the more effective approach is to meet them where they are. But to be able to do that is to identify. It requires identifying where they are. And that involves, in my case, just learning a little bit of vocabulary, which we have to do in anything that we learn about. If I want to learn about
Mhm.
baseball, I'm going to need to develop a baseball vocabulary. Whatever it is that we want to learn about, there's a basic vocabulary involved. And as we learn more and more, that vocabulary deepens and grows much more elaborate. But you're absolutely right. If we were going to deliver a presentation to a certain group, we could probably uh, guess the general talk
Mhm.
types of the group. And then as we engage with individuals, then we can hone in and say, okay, now this individual is a little bit different from the group, and then we can adjust. It's a lot of it's micro adjustments
Mhm.
um, all the way.
Yeah. And it's just like with any type of communication, you need to be able to make adjustments along the way. Based simply, you could look at the physical response of your audience. You're going to start to see, are they tuning in? Are they leaning in? Are they shutting down? Are the arms closed? Whatever. Likely when that's happening is because you're not matching that talk type that they are, right? You can attribute it to whatever you want to call it, but there's a mismatch somewhere along the way. So yeah, you need to be able to adapt and make those micro, as you mentioned, those micro adaptations or micro changes along the way, right? I think what this doesn't mean is if you are a calm, reserved, kind of level, even keeled presenter, right? And you're on stage, you're communicating with someone, and you notice a change. So you just need to all of a sudden become Tony Robbins and completely change your style, right? It's going to be those small tweaks along the way as you learn more about the people that you're interacting with.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh, honestly, in most cases, we're going to have most of the six talk types represented in our audience if we have a large
Mm-hmm.
enough audience. I mean, there are only six possibilities, and so chances are we're going to have some of each in the audience. And so to be able to weave in and out, um, and there are only three variables. So when we think about it that way, it's not as I guess hard or challenging. We'll dip in, we'll do some A, we'll do some B, we'll do some C, and just go back and forth, weave in and weave out, and keep everybody engaged and more or less comfortable. Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned that you brought it up a couple times, it really resonates with me, is that this idea of meeting people where they are and it being an act of generosity, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And it's really throughout my career, starting as a classroom teacher, focusing on meeting the students where they are. At any given time, I would have 25, 30 teenagers in a class, all at different levels academically, different levels of maturity, different levels of what they're dealing with at home, all these factors. So I had to meet every single one of them every day. Quite honestly, it felt like it was changing with them. Kind of meet them where they were on a number of levels. Same thing as a salesperson, as a people leader, it really is an act of generosity to do that for someone. But also, I do think that's a, I don't know if two-way street is the right thing, but by demonstrating that act of generosity, I'm also benefiting from it because it's helping me, right? If I'm in sales, right, communicating with somebody the way that they want to be communicated with helps me. If I'm a people leader, right, understanding the talk type of the folks on my team and what's going to motivate them and drive them and how they're going to best respond to the communication, ultimately is going to benefit the both of us. I think it's kind of a mutual thing there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's true. And that's the beauty of it. That it even those acts of generosity that seem like they're in, they are in many ways intended for other people, but we still kind of receive benefits from that.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And yeah, no act of generosity for somebody else isn't rewarded. Yeah, it comes back. It comes back for sure. So absolutely.
Kind of somewhat on the same lines here, as we think about the applicability of this in the workplace today, the talk type today, and if I think of where business is today, one, so many global multinational organizations, diverse employee groups, as well as diversity in the sense of how many different generations we now have working in the workforce. I would think this talk type has to be critical for people to succeed. So, I mean, how are you seeing this fit in the workplace today to help people thrive in their careers?
So many ways, in addition to just being able to find a better fit, perhaps, and not, I always say Ray Dalio, I quote him a lot for saying that the quality of our life reduces to the quality of our decisions. And if we don't have to make as many mistakes, if you will,
Mhm.
then we don't have to go on six first dates with the same person. We can go on one and say, oh no, that's not going to work, or oh, I want a second date. And the same thing with our careers. I mean, so many people, the the majority of us have shifted careers. um and not that, I was actually trained as a high school teacher myself, and so I know what it's like to be in the classroom with teenagers. And yes, it's rewarding, but you and I have both shifted to something else, and there may be something else down the road. And just because we turn away from a career doesn't mean that we there wasn't some wonder, there weren't some wonderful things from it, of course. But if we ultimately find a better fit down the road, well, what if we could reduce that timeline and start out where we ultimately might have ended up? Well, that would be cool because then we could deepen our experience from the get-go. So being able to make more intentional decisions more quickly, that's huge. Um, and then also just being able to interact with people in a way that again, it shortens the timeline on relationships. It also helps to not take things personally. Um, for example, we hear in communication kind of theory, don't interrupt. How to be a good communicator, don't interrupt. Well, that may be true in a lot of cases, but actually, A's and C's are all about understanding. The A's are about objective understanding, C's are about subjective understanding. So, and B's are about relating and they're, relating their experience. Well, if you their goal is to be heard. So if you interrupt a B and their talk goal is to be heard, well, that actually runs counter to why they're talking. They want to be heard. You interrupt them and they can't be heard. They feel like you're not listening. They're probably going to get upset. But
Mhm.
if you interrupt an A or C and you say, "Hey, wait, hold on. I didn't catch that. Could you explain or go back?" They're probably not going to be upset because their goal is to be understood. And if you stop them along the way to interrupt them and say, wait, I don't understand, That's not antithetical to their goal. That's a goal that's actually aligned with their goal. So there are a number of kind of communication in the teaching behind what makes a good communicator, that if we follow them in the workplace or in our personal lives, yes, we may land, you know, it may land a lot of the time. But if we have the talk type model kind of behind us, then we can fine tune that and say, yes, this communication theory and this teaching is good, but for these specific times. And we can apply that fine-tune knowledge in the workplace and in our personal lives, and our relationships that come out of that are just blossom.
Yeah, it reminds me of the importance of, the playback, right? When somebody is communicating with you. So if I understand correctly, what you said was, so at that, if I think of
Mhm.
that one, right, it's going to help the person that wanted to be heard because you didn't interrupt them. And it's also going to help the person that really wants to be understood because you are validating that I was listening. I think I understand. Did I get that correctly? And as you mentioned, some people, it might be okay if you're going to interject to say, hold on one sec. I want to make sure that I'm getting you that I'm on the same page with you, that I'm tracking with you. And without giving away too much, right? Because we want people to go buy the book, but what might be one tip or strategy that you could share here for somebody to help to start to identify, what is somebody's A, B, or C, at least at the high level, something that they could do?
Yeah, so I like to think of it in terms of, well, a couple strategies. When we're identifying our own talk type, we have access to why we talk, because that's something we don't usually say. If I'm talking to you, Scott, I don't say, "All right, Scott, I'm trying to get that subjective understanding here with you." People just don't do that. Um, so with ourselves, we have access to something that's typically unobservable. That's great. So, but with others, we don't. We have to look at other things like body language, tone of voice, the words they use to structure the talk. That's all in the book. But for us, we have access to a key point, which is the why. So I like to think of it as sitting, walking, running. When we're on a long flight somewhere, international travel, perhaps we got an 8-hour flight. If somebody were to ask us, would you rather sit, walk, or run for 8 hours? Well, of course, most of us are going to say sit for 8 hours. But even on a long flight, it feels good to get up and stretch the legs and find the lavatory. Um, but so in that sense, we have these three variables. Our talk type is our these three variables ranked. So our sitting would be our dominant, our walking would be our secondary, and then our tertiary, which doesn't really show up much in our talk at all, that's the one that wears us out. It's like our running. So I often start with people and ask them, okay, when you're thinking about your talk type, which of the three feels like running to you? It takes energy from you. It doesn't give you energy. It's more depleting than energizing. And so then we rule that one out. Now we're left with two variables. Okay, which one is your sitting and which is your walking? And this is often a little harder for folks because we tend to use both of our top two, and we look at, well, at work I use this, and at home I use. Yes, we don't look at our practices because we all change up our talk depending on who we're talking to and what our
Mhm.
circumstances are. We look at our preferences. So, which one do you just love the most, that feels the most relaxing and energizing to you? Is it learning about facts and factual information? Is it relating to other people and the he said, she said, or look at the cute pictures of my dog on my phone, or is it the kind of deep um, meaning of life? Tell me how you've grown as a person. Which one of these three? And that would be the dominant. And the one we have left is the secondary, and that's the talk type.
Oh,
And
fascinating.
it's fascinating because we are people, if we look close enough, we might think, oh, well, gee, we do all three. Everybody does all three. And we're right, that's
Mhm.
right. We do all three. But actually, if we step back far enough, we can see that there are patterns, and people tend to use their top two and not really the third one. And it's different for everybody.
Mhm.
We tend to follow patterns, and we tend to have preferences that are consistent person to person. Uh, and then I think that's surprising to people. And once you see it, though, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, and I like the distinction that you made. It's we take for granted, right? We know why we're communicating. We don't necessarily always know that from other people. And I think as you get to know people, you can pick up on like minor cues, little things. Somebody as you mentioned, what energizes them, what gets them charged up. And sometimes I can think of throughout my career finishing a meeting, and maybe it was just a product update meeting or a quarterly report out meeting, and you can see at the end the leader is just like completely just like ugh, like that type of thing, reporting on numbers, whatever, is just not what fills their cup. It doesn't energize them, so to speak. Similar to, I was sharing with you earlier that I consider myself to be an introverted person. And as I got to that point, I started to look at what are the things that energize me? What are the types of interactions that drain me? Where do I kind of go to recharge, or what types of things charge my battery? And as I start, I'm like, okay, yeah, there are certain types of interactions, certain types of people that fill me up. Certain things just completely drain me. And I think similar to you, if you're having to do lots of the types of things that are not your primary talk type, likely they're just going to just, pull your energy out.
Exactly. Yeah. And then if we have more of those types of relationships at home where we're doing talk that's kind of out of our natural purview, then we're also drained when we get home. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely knowing about the talk types helps make better decisions in so many ways, professionally and personally. And look, a lot of people aren't aligned in their romantic relationships and interpersonal relationships at home, and with our families. We have the families we have. We don't sign up for that. It is what it is. So, and I'm not advocating that people end relationships that they've been in and want to stay in. I mean, stay in them, but if we're going to stay in them, now we can use the talk type model
Mm-hmm.
to improve them and to have much more of a mutual respect when we understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to we've always heard about, like with relationships, with understanding the other person's love language, where it's understanding what is their talk type, so you know how to best communicate with them and interact with them, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Amanda, as you think about this, how has understanding the talk types really impacted your career and the success you've been having?
As a professor, it helps me to connect with colleagues and students much better, and to make my lectures more engaging for
Mhm.
for a wider audience. And then now just getting the information out there, and it's hard in a if we've got 30 minutes, 40 minutes, however long in a podcast, it's not as much time, but just getting that awareness out there, and trying to do so in a way that reaches us as wide of an audience as possible. It honestly, it takes more time to be able to do that in all of the talk types, sort of the love languages of communication. It might take more time, and we don't always have that time. But but yes, being able to, I guess, reduce some of that into little sound bites here and there, that's what we can do with what we have.
Absolutely. And as we're wrapping up here, what piece of closing advice would you have for folks listening to this, really around the importance of understanding talk types and starting to really implement that in your personal and professional interactions?
I would definitely start by learning about the talk types. Folks can buy the book not because I make much money off of it, but because the information is just, you can't find that anywhere else. I really it's got a lot of utility for folks. So start there, learn the talk types, and then use some of the I guess become more adaptable as much as possible in those ways that we talked about earlier, and watch relationships improve. watch, see yourself how, identify your own talk type, and then ask yourself, okay, in the ways that, if we were going to do a reflection, how is my life working and how is it not working for me? What are the areas? And then do a talk type overlay and say, okay, how much of this is related to maybe a talk type misalignment? Because when we have um, communication goals, these really map onto so many areas of our life, our values, career fit, relationship fit, romantically, friendship, etc. Um, and so if we're just not feeling fulfilled in an area, talk types could really help point us into answers um, that might surprise us.
Yeah, what you said there really jumped out to me is this idea of you need to somewhat establish your baseline. Really,
Mm,
where am I at today when it comes to these relationships, whether it is with my partner at home, whether it is with my colleagues at work, clients, my kids, my social network of friends. Where am I at today? What challenges, what friction is there? And then start to think through, okay, with these talk types, if I were to make some changes, here's where I am. If I make some changes, what could be what could be the impact? And then the magic, right, is where you start to see the positive changes happening in those relationships. Because when you start to see results, that just breeds more and more adoption, really, of these skills and these concepts.
absolutely. And I would add that there are really two paths. So once we have our talk type knowledge, then we can say, okay, I can make intentional decisions to align my talk type with whether it's my career or relationships and what have you. I can make intentional choices to move in this direction now that I've identified the direction I want to go. And that can be made with we identify where we want to make those choices. Then we identify, okay, there are some relationships or maybe some areas I'm plugged in that I don't want to move out of. And there may not be complete talk type alignment. Okay, that's fine. But in those areas where I want to stay put, now I can apply the model to improve those relationships. So it's really all about improvement if we want to stay where we are, and then movement in areas where we want to make change. And the talk type can help us in both ways.
Oh, that's perfect. I appreciate that. And Amanda, if people want to order the book and connect with you, perhaps to learn more about the talk types and the work that you do, what would be the best way for them to do that?
So they can get the book at Amazon or Barnes and Noble. They can go to amandakenderes.com, also talktypes.com. There's a talk type test that they can take. Where it's the beta version, but hey, it's available, and they can go there and start there, take the test, and then, yeah, if they go to amandakenderes.com, they can also fill out a form, contact me, be in touch, set up coaching workshops, etc. So it's all there.
Excellent. I will be sure to put links to those in the show notes so everyone can access them there. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Scott. Again, it's been my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Special thanks again to my guest, Amanda Kenderes. Understanding your talk type can unlock more effective communication, stronger relationships, and even career success. As we discussed, being adaptable and meeting people where they are is an act of generosity, one that benefits both sides. As we close this episode, remember that mastering communication is a continuous journey. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.